What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell. Let's get into something cool. So today I thought, instead of doing just a strictly album review of something, I wanted to talk a little hypothetical situation. I was doing some, interweb surfing, and it kind of hit me like, what would Duane Allman use gear-wise if he were alive today? And I kind of got to thinking, like, his setup was so simplistic before he passed away, that what would he do with the technology musically that we have now? So let's talk about that a little bit. Like always, got my lucky purple cup, and we'll get into that. So Duane Allman, Duane Howard Allman of the Allman Brothers Band, was the older brother to the legendary singer Greg Allman. And if you don't know Duane's history, real briefly, he was a session musician in Muscle Shoals Sound in Alabama. I mean, he played with Aretha Franklin, he played with Wilson Pickett, played on a lot of stuff in Muscle Shoals. He ended up playing on Layla and other assorted love songs with Eric Clapton. I kind of touch on that on a different video if you want to check that out. And then his brother and him started the Allman Brothers Band, the legendary Allman Brothers Band that had a 45-year career on the road. But tragically, Duane would be killed in a motorcycle accident October of 1971 in Macon, Georgia. If you ever get a chance to go to Macon, Georgia, you can go to Rose Hill Cemetery by the river, pay your respects. Greg Allman's also buried there, plus Barry Oakley and former drummer Butch Trucks' ashes, but that's a whole different thing. Now, while Duane was alive, he was known to use mainly Gibson Les Paul guitars, SGs. I have seen photographs from the Muscle Shoals stuff where he's using some type of Strat looking guitar. The bridge on it is very different than a Strat. I'm not really sure what that is. He's been said to have a 335. It's been said that he had a Gibson Firebird for a while. So mainly his main guitars through the Allman Brothers era and the Clapton stuff and some of the recording, like I just mentioned, were humbucker guitars. So amp-wise, I've seen him use Twins, Fender Twins, which is a high-powered clean amp. For the Allman Brothers, it was a 50-watt Marshall bass head, model 1986. That's not the year, because obviously he died in 71. That's the model number. A lot of people get that confused. Dickie Betts used an 87, a 1987 model Marshall. So those are the model numbers. They're not the year, obviously. In his cabinets, he was known to use EV 120, I think they were 120, or JBL PA speakers. He did that because they were so clear. And they put out a lot of wattage. They were very high powered speaker and could handle the Marshall cranked. Of course, it was low wattage Marshall, so he could crank it up. No effects. Of course, effects were in their infancy, really, in that period of time. Guitar, cable, slide, no pick, amp. So I got to thinking, what would Duane use today if he was alive? If you go through the guys that were in the Allman Brothers, Dickie Betts, I mentioned, Warren Haynes, Jimmy Herring, Jack Pearson, Dan Toller, those guys. I mean, Dickie has always been a Marshall and a Les Paul. He used a Paul Reed Smith briefly, ES-335, but mainly a humbucker guitar and a Marshall. Now, Warren was a Marshall, a Soldano, a Diaz, a Homestead, but those later amps that I mentioned, the Diaz, the Homestead, and even a PRS amp that he used briefly, are all very clean amps. The Soldano was very, it's a high gain, high drive amp. But if you ever heard Warren play, especially with the Allmans and Government Mule, it's very clean. It's not super overdriven. Also with the Almonds, excuse me. Also with the Almonds, he's using a volume pedal, sometimes a wah. So those are those guys. Like the other guys I mentioned, Jack Pearson, he's a clean amp, like a Fender Twin. Jimmy Herring's going to be a Marshall. No effects. The Allmans are not very effects heavy. So if you go and you listen to the Duane Allman, and anybody out there on the internet or that's watching this that has not listened to him, I highly suggest that you get into Live at the Fillmore East from 1970, 71. It was released March of 71, and give that a listen. That'll give you what you need from the Allman Brothers of that era. And you can hear the expressiveness that Duane Allman played with. So I got to thinking, the Allmans played through the 70s. They kind of broke up briefly, late 70s, early 80s, and then got back together. I think if Duane had lived past 71, I think he would have stuck with the Marshall and the Les Paul combination. I think going into the 80s, he may have done that also. I think we would have saw some solo material from Duane. I think the lifestyle that the band was in, they may have gotten at each other a little bit, and he would have went along with the split. I don't know. Some of Greg's demons were caused by his brother's death, so I don't know if Big Brother would have kept him out of some of that, but that's all hypothetical. Now, let's talk about when the Allmans reformed. If you go and listen to when they reformed, the first album on their comeback, so to say, is called Seven Turns. And again, it's Marshalls. So I think Duane may have stuck with that Marshall sound. I think he would have stuck with the 50-watt bass head. There were newer Marshalls at that point, and at that time, the JCM 800, the Silver Jubilee, they were all out, but they were all real dirty. Perfect example of the Silver Jubilee Marshall amps is Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. That's the sound. That's what Slash was using. They were all using those Silver Jubilee Marshalls. A Silver Jubilee Marshall was the anniversary of Marshall building amps. And the JCM 800 is similar. That's the amp of the 80s. That's the sound. So I don't know if he would have gotten into that high gain genre of amp. I don't think that he would have went back to Fenders, because Fender really didn't change their amplifier lineup that much. So to get that kind of sound that he was wanting would have been really high volume. And of course, still into the 80s, into the 90s, people were still playing at high volume. So I think that he may have stayed with his Marshall. Now, to get the sound that he wanted at a lower volume, then yes, I think he may have went with a JCM 800 or a Silver Jubilee. By then, he may have had a Marshall deal, who knows. And he may have been rocking the Marshall 412 cabinets with greenback speakers like everybody else has. But when you get into the 90s, that's when it gets interesting for me in my mind, that I like to think that maybe Duane would have, and this is all hypothetical. It's all, we're just talking, right? So Dickie's in the band still. If Duane was alive, I'm not sure if Warren Haynes joins the band. But let's say that Dickey's ousting in 2000 leads Warren to be in the band. All right, so we're going to talk about two scenarios, and I'll get to the other one in a minute. So let's say Warren joins the band, right? So Warren's playing Soldano SLO 100s, right? And he had been using some Marshall Plexi stuff, but his main amp at that time was a Soldano. And I think that he possibly could have turned Duane onto that Soldano just because it's such a well-rounded amp. And I really, in that scene at that time, if you look at some of the bands that were out on the road, like Widespread Panic, Fish, The Dead Still Trucking, I'm thinking Duane may have leaned toward a modern amp like that just to round off the sound a little bit. Would he have used a Soldano? Me personally, I would like to hope so, just because I love him so much, but I could really hear Duane with like a Mesa Boogie Mark amp, like the Mark III or Mark IV. I think those are more recent, but at least the Mesa Boogie kind of amp. I don't see him going the Dumble route. I don't know if it's a little too rounded off for him for his slide sound. But the Soldano, I think he would be rocking. Or he may still have stayed with the Marshall, but I think he probably would have stayed away from the Fender stuff, unless it was a super reverb, like an old super reverb. That gets into another scenario that I'm going to talk about and get to that in a minute. So in this hypothetical lineup, I think he still rocks the Les Pauls. By this point, he's probably just playing modern standard Les Pauls. He may still be lugging around his 58s and 59s, but I doubt it. The legend is that he had a 335 they took the pickups out of. Those pickups stayed with him. So he played a gold top with Clapton. That guitar got those pickups. Then he had the Cherry Burst that he played on Fillmore East. That guitar got the 57 pickups that they think are 57s out of that 335. Then he had Hot Lana, which was the Dark Burst, Tobacco Burst that he's kind of known for, but he didn't really have it that long in his career because he got it earlier in the year that he passed away, I believe, and the pickup stayed with him then. And unless I'm wrong, someone comment below and correct me, but I think those pickups are still in that guitar. I know the guitar's been refretted, but I think the pickups are still the same. So in that scenario, him and Warren are rocking Soldanos, no effects, maybe a little reverb effect, maybe a little delay just to weten the signal a little bit. But I'm thinking that he stays in that realm. And, of course, his ear would be totally different than Warren's. You'd be able to differentiate between the two. But I would like to think that maybe Duane would go that way of a Soldano, Mesa Boogie, something high gain of that era into the retirement. Let's say that he retired with the Brothers in 2014 and is still around today playing solo shows. I'm thinking that's what his gear would be. Now the other scenario that I want to go down the road, and this is no disrespect to Dickie Betts. Let's just say that Dickie Betts being ousted by the band in 2000 like he was is an absolute, right? Is a hard stop, if you will. And that is going to happen no matter what transpires prior and up to that moment. So let's say they bring in Derek Trucks. Now, that situation is very interesting because Trucks, everyone compares Trucks to Duane Allman. Tone-wise, Derek owns one of Duane's Marshalls. So Derek was always, up until a couple years ago, a super reverb guy, which is a Fender amp. It's a 60-watt amp with 4 10-inch speakers. He used those with the Allman Brothers up until recently. Now he uses Alessandro amps, which is a builder out of Nashville, I believe. And they're kind of boutique-y. Given that situation, with Duane Allman and Derek Trucks on stage together, without the influence of Warren Haynes and players like that, I really feel that Duane might have went Fender Bassman, an older Fender Bassman that had been refurbished, or a super reverb. I could also see Duane being influenced by players in that genre where he would use something like a Dr. Z, like a Z28 or a Maz or the new Brad Paisley kind of Z-Rec, which is very clean but breaks up at low volume. I could see that influence of him staying away from the modern high gain stuff and him going with that type of stuff. And that to me would be very interesting to hear him play those lower wattage stuff and it be something boutique-y like that. That scenario, he may have gotten into the Dumble sound. I think he really would have dug Stevie Ray Vaughan. Stevie used Dumbles. Clapton, I don't think ever used Dumbles. I think his relationship with Clapton, they would have stayed friends or whatever. Clapton used the low gain Marshalls and things of that respect. But he also used low gain Fenders through the 70s. So that may have been an influence. So maybe him being in that realm when he gets to the band lineup with Derek Trucks, he may go that route of the Fender amps with the that's not boutique. So effects, I just don't see him going with effects. All the greats in the modern era use a Klon Centaur overdrive, right? It's a distortion pedal, it's an overdrive, it fattens up the sound. I do not see Duane Allman going that route. Would Duane use a wah pedal? That's an interesting question. Based on just his taste, unless I'm wrong, I've never heard him use a wah pedal. I know he was a Hendrix fan. We all are. He probably dug some of that Buddy Guy stuff. He may have gotten into a wah at some point, but I don't think it would have been a staple for him. I think it would have been used very sparingly. Anything else, chorus, phaser, Univibe, I just don't see Duane doing it. But I will say, as experimental as Duane is, he may have just gone a complete right-hand turn on us and been more, a rack full of effects and all kind of sounds. I don't see with his influences him going that way. That's just my personal opinion. Of course, drop something in the comments. Let me know what you think. So guitar-wise, I feel like it's very simple. Les Pauls or SGs, maybe a 335 on some jams, but I'm going to say that he's a Les Paul guy through and through until the day that he grows old, passes away, and they end up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame like they are now. But I feel like that he's a Les Paul guy, no question, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. Comment below what you think. So, I'm thinking if Duane lived in the modern era, I feel like he would either be the low watt Fender Super Bassman, real clean sound, but I really would like to think, and it's just my personal taste, that he would have been a Soldano, maybe a Mesa Boogie, kind of high volume, pushing the speakers. And speakers, I didn't mention speakers. So speaker cabinets, I think he'd still rock the 412 if he went the Soldano, Mesa Boogie kind of boutique kind of thing. But I think he loads them up with Tone Tubby or Eminence Cannabis Rex speakers. Now the Tone Tubbies and the Eminence Cannabis Rex are a speaker that's made from a hemp cone. The actual driver in the speaker, the material for the cone is made from hemp. When you see them, they have a green tint to them. That is a very smooth speaker that rounds off the mid and treble just a little bit. They're very bassy. And when I hear his live at the Fillmore East Tone and what he was trying to get with the EV speaker or the JBL, I think it was JBL's, I could hear him using a hemp cone speaker. Now, Eminence a few years back made a speaker called the Commonwealth that was kind of the JBL thing, high wattage speaker, but I really think that he would have gotten into what Jerry was doing with the Dead and it would have been, he probably would have used the hemp cone speakers. He would have been on that kind of train with that. And then the Supers and the Bassman, they make a 10-inch speaker. I think he just goes that route. I really feel like that Duane ends up going with the hemp cone. That he kind of follows in Garcia's lead and is one of those guys that really pushes the hemp cone. I know Garcia used them. Jimmy Herring uses them, I think. Santana's been known to use some hemp cone. I had a Marshall cabinet that had the Eminence Cannabis Rex in it. I loved them. And a matter of fact, I've got a Marshall Origin 20 10-inch that I'm going to put a hemp cone in here shortly. So yeah, I think Duane probably would end up pioneering, or not pioneering, but kind of falling in with the hemp cone crowd just to round the sound off a little bit. So there you go. It's all up for debate. It's all up for hypothetical conversation, right? That's what we're here to do. It's talk music. So like I said, hit the subscribe button. Drop a comment below what you think maybe Duane used if he was still alive. I hate that he's not. He gave us a very small body of work that we get to enjoy forever because it's on tape. It's digital now. I have the Mountain Jam playing now, which is one of my favorites off Live from Fillmore East. And without his music and his slide influence, we wouldn't have a multitude of players. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about electric slide. So, yeah, it would be interesting. But that's my take. Amp, guitar, minimal effects, or none at all for Duane Allman if he would still be with us. So, yeah, as always, spark a good conversation. Play some good jam. And remember, music is love. Love is music. Talk to you soon.